Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop. I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction, and I'm also one of your instructors in the courses. Today, it's my office hours, and I appreciate you joining me. This is your chance to ask questions related to food and cooking, and it's my opportunity to do my best to answer those questions. And, as I look at the queue, I see a number of questions already entered, already populated. And so it's going to be a nice full hour here, I think. A couple of housekeeping tips as we get started. The first thing is, if you would like to participate more directly in today's event, you are welcome to post a question or even a comment in the dialog box in the upper right-hand area of your screen. And that'll make its way to the queue. And then the next item, if you look at an individual question already posted, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. If you would like me to answer that question sooner than later, you can click on the heart, and that'll push that question up in priority in the list. Okay. Now, before I jump into the questions themselves, I want to talk for a minute or so on a fairly common topic that comes up among students that enroll in our courses, and that has to do with substitute ingredients. And, we have students every day that make ingredient substitutions in their assignments for various reasons. And, we certainly want to accommodate those requirements or those desires. And, one overarching sort of concern or question to keep in mind as we make changes to a recipe is that the finished product, that the outcome is still in alignment with the learning outcomes of the assignment. Okay. And I'll give you an example that I see every once in a while. And this is the clear soup recipe and assignment. Every once in a while, there's a student that wants to make a change, and they will do that on their own. And the result sometimes is that they will create a soup that looks wonderful and sounds just flavorful, but it ends up being a different type of soup. It ends up, for example, becoming a pureed style of soup, which takes the finished product away from the learning outcomes for that lesson and for that assignment. And then in those situations, unfortunately, we need to ask the student to redo the assignment. So a couple of things. One, we always encourage you to reach out to us ahead of time before doing the assignment so that we can troubleshoot. If you look through the Q&A questions for the given assignment, you might find the answer to your question. And that's probably a fair place to start. However, there are times when the solution, for one reason or another, is really unique to that student's situation. And it is beneficial in those cases if the student reaches out to us. And the best place is at support@ruby.com. And that'll give our team a chance to interact directly with you and to problem solve your specific scenario and to come up with a solution that's going to work for all of us. Okay. Also keep in mind that more generally speaking, right, when we make substitutions to recipe ingredients, that things will change in the course of preparing the recipe, and the end result will be just a little bit different than what the author of the original recipe intended. So please be open to those sorts of changes to the finished product. And those changes can vary quite a bit, right? From color or aroma to taste. Taste meaning the sweet, salty, and sour and bitter and astringent qualities, the umami, right, of a finished product, or the flavor. And flavor is associated more closely with aroma. And while there are, 5 or 6 or 7 or so fundamental tastes that we work with in cooking, there are thousands of flavors associated with aromas that we work with. And so, again, as we change ingredients, those things will shift as well. Okay. And then another area where we also see changes is in the cooking method or other ancillary techniques that might be applied to that particular recipe. So, for example, if you switch from, let's say, simmering in a main ingredient to sauteing or roasting or grilling, for example, then what we're doing is shifting, in this case, from a moist heat cooking method to a dry heat cooking method. And you're bound to get a drastic color change. When caramelization is introduced, darker colors will result. But with that will also come more intense flavor and aroma. And so, depending on what sort of a finished product you are envisioning, you can, choose the appropriate path to move forward with. Okay. But again, just keep in mind that you have lots of control over the assignments that you submit. But we do have just a few requirements with each assignment that need to be adhered to. So, we understand that substitutions are necessary, and we support those, and we want to find a solution that will work for you. So, please feel free to reach out to us ahead of time, and we'll take it from there. All right. I hope that's helpful for you, all right, as you work through your courses. So next, let's go ahead and jump into today's program, which is the open office hours and the questions that you've posted. So let me start off with the first one from Frederica, which reads, "Some foods taste better the next day. Why is that? What ingredients would make that happen?" So this is an interesting question, and it's. I'll start out by saying that it's not one that I have a detailed response to. We get into organic chemistry, which is outside of our focus on food and cooking. But very simply, most all foods are going to shift in their flavor and aroma profile with the passage of time. And so again, it's potentially all the ingredients that are involved, but certainly spices, these more intensely aromatic ingredients, tend to be the ones that mellow out and shift and settle down more noticeably than others. And this is why, for example, a curry taste very different the next day. But this can also be said of soups and stews. Okay. In fact, I'll give you a tip. Something that I used to do, something that I really don't see so much in the professional world, at least not very often. And that is, if you're making a soup or a stew for your menu, consider making it a day ahead of time, because it will taste better by the time you serve it. All right. It takes a little bit of planning. You have to cool it and store it and then reheat it. But the effort, I think, is well worth it. Okay. So a little tip of the day. Thank you for that question. And the next one concerns tamarind. So I love tamarind in paste form, says Dana. But the only place I know to use it is in pad thai. What other dishes or places can tamarind paste or tamarind generally be used? So from a culinary perspective, tamarind is a souring agent. And so as we think about the basic tastes that we have in our dishes, sour is one of them. tartness. And there are a number of different ingredients that will lend a sour taste. And it could be tamarind, right? It could be lemon juice or lime juice. It could be a vinegar. There are many different types of vinegar. It could be kokum. Or other ingredients used in other global regional cuisines. Now, in terms of any of these ingredients, you also want to think about the accompanying flavor. So you've got the basic taste, in this case, sour. And then tamarind also has a notable sort of a dark fruitiness to it. And so you want to think about the accompanying flavor as you choose your souring agent. In the case of tamarind, I use tamarind in stews and also soups, as a souring agent fundamentally, where I also want that accompanying richness from the fruitiness that comes with tamarind. And so if you think about that broad approach to cooking and how you might use a souring agent, I think that you can find many places where you might use tamarind paste, usually paste. And, very similarly, if you were using the bulk tamarind, which you can buy in many grocery stores. In fact, I was just at a halal store yesterday where I picked up a pack of tamarind in bulk, which contains the seeds as well as these tough bits and pieces from the pod. And so in that case, you want to soak that for a little bit in some warm water or hot water, and then work it with your fingers and break down that pulp until it's nice and smooth. And then you can run it through a fairly coarse strainer to pull out the big chunky tough pieces. And then you can let all that beautiful fiber and other flavorful bits and pieces through. And then you've got usually tamarind water at that point. Now, if you prefer to use a thicker paste, then this is where you might reach for a ready-made product in a jar. You can buy these at Mexican grocery stores as well as Indian or other South Asian grocery stores. Okay, thank you. All right, next question. Is there a substitute for cashews that could be used to make vegan cream or cheese? With the amount of processing that cashews need to be extracted from the fruit, I am not sure they were ever intended for human consumption. So regarding plant-based cream and cheese and a substitute for cashews, the first thing that I would suggest is to experiment with other nuts. Cashews are very common for a couple of reasons. One, because they're fairly neutral in flavor, and also they're very smooth in their texture, so that especially with a high-speed blender or a food processor, they can be processed to a nice smooth consistency, so that it's very enjoyable on the palate. But if you first of all just shift toward another nut of your choice, keeping in mind that a fairly neutral nut in flavor, would be, let's say, a macadamia nut. Brazil nuts are fairly neutral in flavor, unlike, say, walnut or pecan, which are very noticeable in their flavor profile. Although I will also add that there's certainly nothing wrong with using those, in a cream or cheese if that accompanying flavor fits your desired outcome. Okay, so I encourage you to experiment widely, otherwise with the same approach, and that is to soak the nuts in order to give yourself the best chance of creating a nice smooth consistency in the finished product. Okay, and then as you make a cheese, for example, you can move forward with all of the usual flavoring ingredients. Nutritional yeast is very common. Sometimes it's garlic. It could be as far as the sigillants go or souring agents, you've got lemon juice and then also vinegars. And all those things can come together in a very complex and very nice way with, whatever base nut that you're using. Okay, so give that a try, please. Thank you. All right, and the next question, or two, it looks like, from Marilyn, and says, can I get a quick opinion on two things? When to use salt with cooking, in this case, boiling potatoes, and when to use salt at the end. Also, when to put a lid on the pot, in this case, potatoes again, and when to boil without the lid. All right, many recipes don't mention the lid. So lids. A general reason for using a lid is to get your liquid up to temperature faster, right? So you don't lose so much heat to the atmosphere. So if you put a lid on it, then a large pot of water for simmering potatoes or boiling pasta, for example, is going to come up to temp a little bit faster than an unlidded pot. Now, also keep in mind that when we use a lid, that the water will tend to boil more vigorously. So if we have a food item, and really most food items should be handled delicately, whether they first appear delicate or not. All food really deserves to be handled gently and delicately, and otherwise with respect. But certainly when it comes to potatoes, I consider those fairly delicate items once they go into the water. And just to run us all through the basic steps of cooking potatoes, in this case, waxy potatoes or russet potatoes or the mealy variety of potato, we will start those in cold water and, cut those into, usually fairly large pieces, but the size overall should be fairly uniform so that the heat penetration across the pieces is as uniform as we can get it. And that's going to ensure the most even cooking and the best overall results for that batch of potatoes. Okay. So we start out in cold water and we bring the temperature up relatively slowly. And you can put a lid on it or not. I mean, with the lid on, it's going to be a little bit faster. Without the lid, it'll take a little bit longer. So it's going to be up to your schedule at that point. But bring the temperature up relatively slowly. So that the heat has time to slowly penetrate toward the center of those pieces of potato. Now, what happens is, what happens when, I should say, we use water that is hot to begin with or comes up to temperature too quickly, is that the outside of the potato pieces will cook much faster than the interior of the potato pieces. And the outside will become overcooked and start to slough off or break off before the interior is adequately cooked. So this is why we want to do our best to sort of equalize the cooking, really by just slowing down the heat penetration. Okay. And hence we start in cold water. Now, again, whether you use a lid on the pot is really up to you, but experiment and keep in mind that you want to maintain a relatively gentle environment. So simmering is our goal with potatoes and not boiling. Boiling is a rough environment that will sort of bump the pieces against each other, and it'll cause the outsides to break and crumble and crack. And we not only do we end up with pieces that are visually less attractive than they could be, but also our yield on the product decreases. And yield means the usable product from that given food item. Okay. And we consider that to be very important in the kitchen, whether in a professional kitchen where money matters or when cooking at home. And certainly our household budget, our food budget matters. Okay. Now, In terms of salt, generally salt can be added multiple times throughout the cooking process, and that's the general approach to cooking. And it gives salt, number one, the chance to start to be drawn into the food item very early during the cooking phase. And that's going to give you a better seasoned product and, a more enjoyable product on the palate. But it also gives us a chance to adjust seasoning as the cooking process progresses. And certainly at the end of the process, we would check to do a final adjustment as needed. Now, with potatoes, we're not necessarily worried about a final adjustment if we will use the potatoes in another preparation or otherwise finish them in some way, such as with a dressing. Okay. However, if your intent is to simmer the potatoes, strain them, and then basically serve them as is, then the tasting and addition of salt along the way becomes more desirable. Okay, so there's not a single correct answer, but rather multiple, or at least two or three correct answers, depending on your desired outcome. Okay, so please experiment and find the path forward that works for your particular situation, your particular preparation, for example. Okay, and this is, I think, a good point to mention that in the world of cooking, there is usually in really in the savory kitchen, in other words, outside of baking, there's usually multiple ways that you can move forward, and it requires experimentation and finding what fits your palate, your family's preferences, your audience, your equipment, all these sort of variables that come into play. What you choose needs to fit those variables. Okay. And so, while in our lessons, we will give one or sometimes a couple of ways forward, keep in mind that you will encounter additional variations on a cooking method or some way to handle a food product. Be open, please, to those additional ways, and find the path of least resistance moving forward, in your own cooking setting. All right, let's take a look. Just make sure I've touched upon all of Marilyn's sub questions here. So salting and the lid. So I think that does it. Again, Marilyn, just keep in mind that, when it comes to potatoes, I will salt in the beginning and usually let it go because I'm going to finish it in some other way. But, you can feel free to salt multiple times. And, with the lid, give it a try, understanding what we're trying to achieve here, right? Slow, even heat penetration through the cooking process in order to maintain the integrity of the potato. Thank you. All right, next up from Jay on garlic prep. I crush cloves to remove the skin and release the oil. Okay, I noticed that many chefs thinly slice the garlic cloves. Any purpose for using either technique for given application? So, a couple of things come to mind, Jay. One is that if you're crushing a product, you're going to create more surface area. And so there's an opportunity for more flavor to be released from the garlic versus slicing. And it certainly would depend on just how thinly and how much we slice the garlic. But one way or another, there could be a variation in the amount of surface area and therefore the amount of flavor that's released or the rate of release. And so you have some control. And, similarly, we have control as cooks on how vigorously we crush the garlic clove, or just, as I mentioned, how thinly and how much we slice a garlic clove. For example, slicing a garlic clove once to split it in half versus slicing it 15 times, right, will result in a different amount of surface area. And in a similar manner, the crushing, can be controlled as well. So, I compare those. I think about those two. And then, also, I mean, this is a bigger story here, but and maybe not so much of an issue when we're comparing crushing to hand slicing of garlic, okay? Because hand slicing is done at a pretty gentle, slow speed. But let me give you an example of hand processing, whether it's with a knife or with a mortar and pestle, or whether it's with your bare hands, versus a faster mechanical processing done with a food processor. Okay. I had an experience at what used to be a favorite restaurant of mine. It was a Lebanese restaurant here in Portland, Oregon, where they had tabbouleh, of course, on the menu. And I used to go when the parents of this family were still in charge of the kitchen. And they hand cut all of their parsley that went into the tabbouleh. And, with that, you get a nice, delicate, even, and sometimes even sweet flavor that comes out from the parsley. And, there was a point in time when the business was handed off to the next generation. And the kids that grew up here very quickly introduced mechanization, food processors to break down the parsley. And the next time I went in, I immediately noticed the bitterness in the tabbouleh. And when I looked at the tabbouleh on the plate, I also saw the weeping of the water around the edges, which are a couple of pretty typical signs of a in this case, an herb, right, that was processed with a fast cutting machine versus hand cutting. And I immediately knew what the results were. And I actually brought it up to the new owner at that time. And the new owner was not happy to hear my feedback. And I stopped going to that restaurant. But anyway, that's my own thing. But the point here is that, yes, the handling of products can make a difference, but in particular, hand processing versus mechanized processing. Okay. And that's where I see the most stark differences coming out into the food. Whereas slicing versus crushing, the difference will be much smaller. But again, just pay attention to the surface area that is created. All right. In the case of garlic. Thank you. All right. Next up, question from Heather. How can the basic pasta recipe be made gluten-free? Yeah, so this is a question that we get from time to time. And, the easiest solution here is to reach for a gluten-free flour blend from the store. And, these days there are many different types of gluten-free blends available for specific applications. And for example, Bob's Red Mill is a company that produces a number of different gluten-free blends for bread or pizza crust or pasta or something else. And so that's what I would recommend that you do. Otherwise, if you want to try to design your own gluten-free blend, it will take a lot of trial and error. And I certainly wouldn't dissuade you from doing that, but do keep in mind that it'll take some time and a lot of experimentation in order to find a texture that's going to be pleasing to you. Whereas that testing has already been done, right, by Bob and his team. And so please give that a try. Thank you. All right, next question from Robert. What is your opinion on tabletop knife sharpeners? What type of sharpener the type of sharpener that you slide the knife through coarse and fine slots? Yes, a tabletop sharpener, I think, is fine. There are different ways, right, to sharpen a knife. Uh, a whetstone or a whetstone set, for example, is one way. An electric or an automated in some fashion knife sharpener is another way forward. And then also, and this might be what you're talking about, Robert. I guess this could be an electric, countertop model, as well as a manual countertop model that has these V notches. I guess they can be manual or electric. I think those work quite well. Now, if you want to really get down and split hairs, in this sort of a discussion, the results from a whetstone will be superior to that from a simpler device, that we're talking about here. But the trade-off is to get superior results on a whetstone. There's a long and sometimes steep ramp up process. There's a lot of practice that's involved, and so that's the trade-off, right? If you don't want to fiddle with whetstones and all that goes into that, the maintenance of them and your own skill development and your own skill maintenance, then I think, using a sharpening device in the way of an electric or manual tool is a great way to maintain your knives. I'm a big fan of those. Don't hesitate to use such a tool. All right. Thank you. All right. Next question. Hello, Estella. What do you think of the salad in a jar, which stays in the fridge for days? If you like it, how many days should it keep fresh in the fridge? This is a good question. I'll first say that I don't use that technique. But I have certainly come across people that do and certainly see it a lot online. And, I like to use prepped salad greens. It really depends on how they're dressed. And there's a lot of nuance here, but, within, say, 3 days or so, if they're not dressed, I mean, if they are dressed, maybe 3 days is a maximum, but probably less than that in terms of enjoying a crisper salad experience. Now, the flavor can be quite fine, even with some wilted greens, but and again, maybe there's a technique to keep them crisp for a longer period of time, but experiment. Again, that's kind of my benchmark. A couple of 3 days or so, but see what you like, see what you enjoy, and go from there. All right. A lot of this is personal preference, right? And that's also the beauty of cooking. As we add a pinch of this and a spoonful of that, or we let something sit for 1 day or 3 days, whether it's a marination process, whether we're soaking beans or whether it's a salad in a jar, there's a lot of leeway. Okay. And again, any course of study, any website or blog is probably going to tell you one answer. But please understand that there's probably more than one answer. And a lot of times there are many answers. And even when it comes to, issues of food safety and sanitation, there can be more than one answer. So please keep that in mind. Okay. But do experiment and have confidence in your own palate and, trust your senses and, have some fun with the process. All right. Thank you. All right. Hello, Tara. This question is probably Cooking 101. But what are your thoughts on rinsing boiled pasta before applying a sauce? I have heard many chefs give different opinions on rinsing versus not rinsing. This is a good question. And one that we get every once in a while here as well. I'll start with gluten-free pasta. Okay, because gluten-free pasta is often sort of sticky by its nature, we generally recommend rinsing it after cooking in order to rinse off any residual starch on the surface that might add to the stickiness. Okay. Now, when it comes to other pasta, let's say regular, right, wheat flour pasta. Here again, I would say personal preference. The bigger question for me is the quality of the pasta that you're using, and that the surface texture, for example, in terms of clinging onto sauces, which is always a thought or a concern or an objective, right? When we're cooking pasta. I, if I'm going to serve the pasta right away, then I don't bother rinsing it. When I do rinse pasta is when I'm cooking it in advance and I'm going to par cook it, and I want to stop the cooking process before I store it. Then I'll rinse it. That's my way forward. Okay. By doing that, you're controlling the cooking of the pasta by getting rid of the residual heat and stopping the cooking process. Okay, so that's very important, especially in a professional setting where it is very common to par cook pasta for later service. Okay. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, when you're choosing a pasta and accompanying sauce, is to choose, a shape of the pasta to go with the consistency of the sauce. And that's where all these, beautiful pasta shapes, these spirals and ridges come from, right? It's really to capture the sauce. So I think that's probably a more important issue. But yeah, again, regarding, your own preference, do 2 batches side by side and see what you like better. Okay. And that's the sort of experimentation that I do on a fairly regular basis at home. And I always encourage that for my students as well. Do multiple batches, run a taste test, take notes. And what you will often find is that a particular way suits a particular situation or desired outcome, and that other way will suit a different situation. So both can be viable, but for different reasons. All right, thank you. And next question from Diane. If I'm following salt, oil, sugar-free diet, is salt eliminated in cooking? This is another very fun question. Okay, fun in that it is really up to you, the cook. On one hand, when I read or hear salt-free, that tells me that there is no salt, no added salt anyway. However, it's really up to you, the cook, to find a balance that works for you. Now, for example, if added salt really poses an acute health concern, then maybe that means the elimination of salt, like no added salt. But if you've got some leeway in there to play with some seasoning with a low salt diet, then find a place that works for you. And this might be, in consultation with your health provider to find, a sodium level that's going to be safe, yet will yield some tasty food. Okay, so when it comes, for example, to our Forks Over Knives course, the Forks Over Knives course, fundamentally talks about the elimination of added oil and other potentially troublesome ingredients. But, most of our students are adjusting, decreasing oil, sugar, salt, rather than totally eliminating it. And so, you get to make that call, based upon your individual situation. All right. Thank you. All right, next up from Sarah, a question about vegetable stock. I end up, when making vegetable stock, adding about a quarter cup of miso and a quarter cup of bouillon gel to a reduced stock pot of water to get 2 quarts with rich enough flavor, but I fear it's too much sodium. Is there a better way? Well, flavor-wise, I think you're on the right track, and I say that because I mean, I make miso soup every morning, at least Monday through Friday, for breakfast here at home, and you know, the ratio that you're mentioning here, I'm not sure what's in your bouillon gel, but looking at your quarter cup of miso per 2 quarts, that's probably well, it might be a touch more than what I use. Um, so, well, let's talk about this, okay? That's why you're here. That's why I'm here, right? So, you know, if we want to use miso, and again, I don't know what's in your bouillon gel, but I'm sure it's wonderful stuff, and we'll kind of keep that, you know, in the back of our mind here. But when we talk about using miso, miso is indeed relatively high in salt, in sodium. So, you know, we need to take that into account as far as our daily intake is concerned. And certainly if you have you know, a pre-existing concern around sodium consumption, then, you know, we need to really be cognizant of the miso. So, you know, what we do in the Japanese kitchen, when sodium intake is a concern, but miso soup is still part of your diet, is to make a dashi, right, or that stock that's based on other ingredients, whether it's shiitake or kelp or kombu, could be other sea grasses, okay, and we'll make that at a fairly robust flavor level, so that we can add less miso and still have an enjoyable finished product. Okay. So, you know, in terms of your scenario here, if it's the salts or the sodium that's the concern, then I would say increase the other vegetable ingredients, you know, in the stock recipe that you're using. And you might even add other ingredients, you know, whether it's garlic or fennel bulb or something else that's going to add the flavor intensity and the type of flavor that you're after. And that will go well with the miso and the bouillon gel that you're adding. Okay. And that way you can use less of those sodium rich ingredients. Okay. Give that a try. Thank you. Okay. So I'm looking at your correction, Sarah. Thank you, regarding vegetable peels. So, you know, here, you know, you might consider just adding a little bit of some whole products, you know, or as I mentioned, other things like sea grasses, sea vegetables. Kombu is going to be the classic, or it could be some shiitake or other mushroom, which will add nice aroma as well as a lot of umami. And that's going to give you that satisfaction that I think you're after, okay, in that finished product. All right, thank you. And let's see, Alfredo is asking, Alfreda, excuse me, do you use asafoetida in your cooking? Yes, I do. In particular, when cooking beans or other legumes in the Indian kitchen or otherwise the South Asian kitchen, asafoetida is routinely added to beans in order to reduce the incidence of flatulence. Okay, so kind of like the effects of epazote in the Mexican kitchen, or sometimes kombu, you know, in the Japanese kitchen. Asafoetida has the effect of reducing flatulence when cooking bean preparations. From my own experience, I'll say that it doesn't eliminate flatulence, but does contribute to the reduced incidence of those events. And, otherwise, Asafoetida has the aroma of, garlic and onion. And so there are people that don't use onion and garlic, but will use Asafoetida to bring some of those interesting notes to their cooking. And so it, can be used in many preparations, potentially. Give it a try. See how you like it. Thank you. All right. Next question. I made 5-spice powder as one of my FOK activities. What are some ways to use this spice mix in plant-based cooking? Aha. So, yeah, 5-spice can go well in soups and stews. And as well as a part of, say, a marinade or a rub that might go on grilled items or even oven roasted items. There's really a lot of different ways you can use it. It can go with starchy foods like potatoes as well as noodles. Whether in a dry preparation or a wet, a soup or stew like preparation. I think the important thing is for you to taste the 5-spice blend on its own, to see how you like some of those bright colors, star anise, for example, and then start to incorporate it, into a stir fry, right? Or a soup or a stew or a casserole. And, go easy when you're introducing spices. Start with small quantities to see, how those flavors and aromas, bloom or shift with the application of heat and time, and then see how you like the finished results. And then you can always add more next time. But that's going to be, I think, the best way forward for you to experiment and then to learn, right? Again, what your individual preferences are, as well as the audience, that you're cooking for. Okay. Thank you. All right. Next question. I tried making a panna cotta made with cashew cream, pureed, strained blueberry, and agar. It soft set beautifully, but next day it started to weep. What might cause this? Aha. So the weeping, or it's sometimes called syneresis, it's very common with foods that are not stabilized. And so in this case, you've got some agar and you've got the presence of the fiber from the blueberry and other things that you might have in this blend. And, that will hold it in as a temporary stabilizer, but given time, the moisture will weep. And so, your choice is to enjoy it on day one or to increase the stabilizer. In this case, it would be the agar. In order to extend that shelf life in terms of the syneresis that's occurring. Okay. So think about, experimenting first of all, and to see if you will like the texture of the additional agar. And that's really sort of where consumers lie, right, on their acceptance or rejection of agar period or more agar in a given preparation. It's going to be along the lines of the texture. Okay. So I encourage you to experiment and find a happy place, again, for you as well as your audience. All right. Thank you. Hello, Larry. See, what do you think of the Gourmet Garden or other brands stir-in pastes in lieu of the real thing for hard-to-find ingredients, lemongrass, etc.? Aha. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's been a long time since I've used these products. The last one was from an Australian company, and it could even be what you're referring to. I'm not sure, but yeah, I've had lemongrass and ginger, and I think a couple of other things. And um, I think in a pinch, in a setting where it's truly difficult to get, as you say, the real thing, the fresh version of some of these perishable ingredients, these very aromatic, flavorful ingredients. Otherwise there is a little flavor difference. And again, the best way forward is to do a side-by-side comparison, so that first of all, what the similarities and the differences are. And then, you can decide, whether uh, these products will be a suitable substitute when the real thing is hard to find, or maybe it gets expensive, in your area. Um, but there's some processing involved, and there's usually a preservative of some sort that's added to make them shelf stable. And sometimes they're heat treated. And all of those things will sort of encourage that food item to shift, right, a little bit in its flavor and aroma. So again, how much, you want to tolerate is up to you. Again, I think they're quite acceptable, in a pinch. But if, in season or, otherwise when the real thing is available, by all means, even if the real thing is a little more expensive, I would try to reach for those just to maintain the trueness of the aroma and the flavor. All right. Thank you. All right. Next question. How do you know when you can interchange flours like chickpea, almond, oat? There are so many to choose from now. Also, the best way to store those packs of herbs like dill, basil, etc. Okay. Well, let's start with herb storage first. Generally herbs benefit from storage in a cool place. Okay. Now, some herbs, such as fresh basil, they can be sensitive to temperatures that get too cool. And therefore, when you put them in a refrigerator that is particularly cold, or a location inside the fridge that's particularly cold, they will turn black, right? They will look like they're all wilted on you, in a short period of time. So, first of all, with more hardy herbs like thyme and rosemary and even dill, consider wrapping them in a damp towel, whether paper or cloth, and then storing that, in a lot. Some people will store them in a small plastic box with a lid that'll, fit into your refrigerator. They can certainly go into a crisper drawer, but they need to be protected from the drying effect of the refrigerator. And so keep in mind that generally speaking, the refrigerator acts to extract moisture from the environment. And that's why herbs will wilt very quickly, and bell peppers get wrinkly, after just a day or so. So if we can reintroduce some of the moisture, or otherwise, protect the product from the dehydrating effects by wrapping, in this case, the herbs in a damp towel, that can extend the shelf life. Okay. Some things like cilantro, you need to be careful of, because they can be pretty delicate. And if you introduce too much moisture, they will start to rot. And so there's a little balance to be played there, mostly in terms of buying smaller quantities and eating it faster, in my experience. Basil, sometimes, you'll see folks that will store basil upright in a little bit of water in a container, either on the countertop in your kitchen, outside of the refrigerator, and people have success with that. Others don't. Others will store it in a container upright in a little bit of water with a lid on it, in the refrigerator, and then pluck leaves from that. Try both ways to see what might work in your situation, right? Based upon your usage rate, as well as ambient temperature in your kitchen, as well as the temperature in your refrigerator. Okay, so some experimentation, again, is necessary. Now to the first part of your question regarding interchanging flours, almond flour, oat flour, chickpea flour, etc. So, some of this will depend on what you're making. If we're making cookies and quick breads, generally we can interchange flours relatively easy. And, I recommend starting with a small amount, probably not more than 25% of a new item, so that you can see a couple of things. One, how it acts in that particular environment of baking. Okay. And then number two, how you like the end results in terms of the texture and the flavor and the aroma. Okay. Some items like chickpea flour will have a pretty noticeable aroma, and it can be a little bit sticky, in the end, as can be oat flour, for example. So try to bring in small amounts and experiment along the way. I especially when I make cookies, I use all kinds of flours, and cookies are very forgiving. Especially once you have nuts and raisins and a few chocolate chips added to the mix. Whether it's chickpeas or oats or something else, they all turn out quite fine, for our household. But I recommend experimenting again. Take notes along the way so that you can customize, what it is that you're doing for your particular setting. All right. Thank you. All right, Pamela. Let's see. Pamela says, my husband used to love smoking meats in his smoker. Now that we're plant-based, he has asked if there is anything plant-wise that he can smoke. Hopefully this is not misconstrued as a different kind of smoking. Well, I must say, Pamela, as soon as I saw plant-based and smoking, anyway, yeah, you bet. You can smoke anything in your smoker, right? Whether it's thick slices of tofu or full blocks of tofu, or root vegetables or something else. And so, I would encourage, right, your husband to just try, some short smoking durations for some light flavor infusion on different vegetables. And start with root vegetables that might be incorporated into a soup or a stew, right, where that smokiness might be more broadly incorporated along with other flavors, so that you can test it out, right? The last thing you want is something that is over smoked and then introduced to a dish, which can be unpleasant, as you might be aware of. But otherwise, you can smoke cheese, right? You can smoke nuts. You can smoke chocolate. You can smoke creams that might go into making a ganache. So you have a smoky ganache that you make. You can apply smoke to so many different things. And so if anything, this just opens up a huge new world, right, for your husband. For some experimenting and some fun eats as well at home. I hope you'll go forth and have fun with this. Thank you. All right, next up, it's like another question from Jay. In making berry coulis, blackberry or strawberry, for example, proper technique using fine chinois in removing seeds. Too much force will jam the mesh, I would think. Yes. So, this is one of processing the fruit before we put it through the strainer. So if you're simmering fruit and then just put it into a strainer, you're going to have a lot of chunky product at that point. In which case, you might want to use a more coarse strainer. When I hear chinois, I'm picturing a pretty fine strainer. In which case, I would probably put the product through a blender first, and then I might try to push it through a chinois. Now, one way or another, with a chinois or other fine strainer, the seeds are going to end up clogging up the bottom of the cone, right? So you're going to start, you'll end up pushing the puree up the sides with your spatula in order to find open space to push it through. So that's the technique. All right. You can't go down the center after a little bit because it's clogged up. So you got to just use your spatula and push it up the sides, or use a more coarse strainer and see how you like those results. It all depends on how you process it. Okay. So if you put it in a blender, some of the seeds will get broken up, in which case you want to use a finer strainer. If you don't put it through a blender, then the seeds stay whole, and you can use a more coarse strainer that will grab the seeds. Okay. Now you always have the option of putting it through a strainer a couple of times. All right. So you might, put it, however you want to figure it out. I guess you can push it through, a coarse strainer first, and then the chinois second. Just kind of play with that, and you're going to find a balance that works for you. But the two strainer method can be very successful too. All right, thank you. All right, question from Valentina. Hello. I live in a mountainous area and have noticed that whenever I go hiking above 2,000 meters, right, so well above 6,000 feet above sea level, food tends to taste bland. How do you compensate for the reduction in taste bud sensitivity at high altitudes? Do you have any tips? So the quick fix that comes to my mind is to more intensely flavor the food. And taste buds, as well as the temperature of foods, right, can shift our sensitivity toward the flavors. So in this case, we're talking about elevation. So I would take a similar approach, where I would recommend you experiment with using more spices and other aromatic ingredients that can, hopefully give you more satisfaction in these settings where you're experiencing a reduction in your taste bud sensitivity. Okay, that's what comes to mind. Sounds like a pretty fun experiment. Yeah, very interesting. I've had recent conversations with folks that sell food for backpackers, and this topic never came up. And so the next time I'm in that situation, I will bring up this topic. It's very interesting, Valentina. So give it some experimentation, and let me know how it goes. I'm curious what sort of results you might experience. All right, thank you. All right, next up, hello, Marcy. Thank you for doing these events. My pleasure, and I'm so happy that you, as well as the others in the audience, are here today to join us for this event. I run a farmers market, gluten-free sourdough bakery, currently enrolled in Pro Plant course and love it. Excellent. I've taught on-site baking classes, want to move some online. Any tips how to plan an online course? Okay. So, um, the, the big thing really is to think about your sort of your limited exposure. I mean, if your camera is stationary, you might have a couple of cameras, one stationary, one mobile. But um, think about what it is that is your limitation, right, in your domain in terms of where your food is set out. A lot of times we're working with a single stationary camera, in which case we need to bring things in and out in a way that is going to show detail from the appropriate angle of view. And so this is where practice will be important, I think, in order for you to tell the story that you intend to tell. It's fairly common when I see online courses or on just videos in general of cooking, where a person is trying to show a particular aspect of food, but because of the angle, the viewer is unable to really appreciate what it is that the cook or the baker is seeing live. And then another part of this is also to play with the clarity or the focus of your camera, right? Where very often we're trying to show off something detailed, that things get blurry. Okay, so do you keep those sort of technical basics in mind? And then also, if you've got a set time that you're working with, then you might write out a script, and then also practice with what sort of props that you might need, whether they're tools or whether they're pre-made items, to a midpoint, right, to show what cooking in process might look like. And so prepare, those sorts of props, in a way that will follow the script, that will fit within the time frame that you're designing, so that your courses will, be of a consistent length of time. I think that's nice that if you can do that. Okay. Um, so, and yeah, and then, otherwise, as you're discussing a food item, keep in mind that the viewer has limited access to what you're talking about, whether it's the view, the color, texture, size, these sorts of things that we see, as well as the aroma or the taste that you might be experiencing in front of the camera. And so we want to do the best we can to bring those things into view, or otherwise explain those things that might be out of view sufficiently, okay, so that the viewer can really appreciate what it is that you're experiencing. Okay, hope you'll keep those few things in mind. Thank you. And P.S. Okay, from Marcy. GF, gluten-free, and the on-site classes I teach are for gluten-free sourdough breads. Looking forward to adding more whole food plant-based material to my classes. Yeah, awesome. I think that, to be offering sourdough breads in the realm of the gluten-free world is awesome. There's more and more demand for this sort of thing. And, as you talk about introducing more whole food ingredients, I think that's so important. And not only in your world of baking, but also for all of us, for cooking in general. When we look at a plant-based world, right, of eating, there are so many processed foods available to us, whether they're snack foods or convenience foods, or some other aspect of the grocery shopping experience. Keep in mind, right, that very often what we were moving away from in the broader sort of world of food, when before we came to the plant-based world, was processed foods. And if we adopt plant-based I'll say vegan, right, processed foods, we're not doing ourselves any favors, right, from a health perspective. And so if health is your motivational point, then we really need to be thinking about whole foods. And keep in mind also that if we really want to adopt a whole food, plant-based sort of a lifestyle, there is inconvenience involved. Okay. Because as we move away from processed foods, which equal convenience foods, we move toward inconvenience, which means that we need to structure our week and our day more strategically so that we can prepare foods in advance, through the principles of batch cooking, which is really, a core lesson in all of our courses, in order to bring efficiency to your operation. And along the way comes skill development. And a key skill to develop will be your knife skills. And it takes time. So please be patient with yourself so that you can learn to prepare foods more quickly, more efficiently through your higher level of skill that you've developed, conscientiously over time. And it's only when all of those things start to converge that we get the best results that we can, in this world of cooking with whole foods. But I hope all of you will give that your best effort. Okay. And then the next question up says, I was wondering if Ruby will be having cheese making as a course in the future. Stella, that's a great suggestion, and it is duly noted. And I will, take this, to our team for discussion. We are always looking ahead to course development, and certainly part of what drives our decision-making process is you, right, and your demand. And let's see if cheese will be one of those things, right? Thanks for your suggestion. And next up, this is from Sarah. Thank you so much for your good counsel. Always, I'm becoming a much better cook because of these sessions. Excellent. It really is my pleasure to share, my experience, and I will be the first to say that my experience is just one wedge, right? One piece of the larger world of cooking. So I hope that you will take suggestions and ideas from other Ruby instructors, as well as cooks and chefs from the rest of the world, right, that you might encounter. I certainly do. As I attend cooking classes and talk to not only professional chefs, but also home cooks to further and deepen and broaden my knowledge of food. And, I hope that you will do the same. All right. And this brings us to the end of our session today. I want to thank each one of you for joining my office hours and today's Ruby Live event. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, happy cooking.